Hello and welcome to the Game Dev Garden, a podcast all about deep conversations, game development, curiosities, mental health, and wherever the dialogue might take us. And thank you so much for joining me here today. And I would like to welcome today's guest. Alex Beddows is a senior environment artist at Microsoft Studios' The Initiative and has been working in games for 9 years. He has contributed to projects such as Godfall and Decagon, while also running mentorships to skill up and encourage the next generation of game artists. And if that wasn't all enough, he also runs the podcast Game Dev Discussions. Welcome to the show, Alex. It's such a pleasure to have you.
Thank you for having me on. It's gonna be weird being on this side of the mic.
Oh my gosh, right? Both of us hosting little shows, and hopefully we can answer some cool questions and go to some exciting places.
For sure, man.
No worries. Well, let's just dive straight into it. Alex, could you take us down a little road of the journey that you've traveled as a games artist, and just tell us a little bit about your story?
Man, it's a weird. So I've had a very weird route into games. I'm a self-taught artist, so I didn't go to higher education. I didn't go to university. My early life, late teenage years, like I was playing professional rugby. So I was kind of like, I don't want to go to university. So I went to university. I was contracted to a team in my hometown of Coventry. So I went to college, did game design, or it was game art and design, sorry. And straight out of that, I couldn't find an industry job. I didn't really have the portfolio yet. So I was focused so heavily on rugby. I was working in construction, bricklaying. I worked in catering for a bit, and retail for a bit. And eventually, I think I was 19, I found a gig at a very small, it was called Serious Games. It's like games technology used for educational purposes. So I was working there while focusing on rugby, and basically up until probably the age of 24, 25, I was juggling both professional rugby and trying to be an artist. And around that time, I was working in iGaming, which is casino games and all stuff like that, mobile games. I made a choice. I was spread pretty thin. I wasn't really making much progress on either end. Like when you're an athlete, you know when you're going to make it. You know when because to earn a living as an athlete, you have to be the best of the best, really. And I knew I wasn't. I mean, I was good at what I played, but I definitely wasn't going to be able to buy a house being a rugby player. So I decided to quit rugby altogether and just completely focus on the art. And that's when I found myself, Decagon. Very quickly progressed to a lead environment artist there. Went to Counterplay, shipped Godfall, and while I was at Counterplay, I was working at ArtStation. After shipping that and doing it, and we got the expansion out, find myself now at the Initiative. I've had a very weird route through the industry. It's not a conventional route by any means. A lot of people I speak to, it tends to be education, first job, and then it's progressed through the industry like that. Mine's definitely been an unconventional route.
Totally. And I think a lot of people and a lot of graduates kind of feel like their first job is always going to be at some big AAA company. And that's just not the reality for so many of us. I have loads of friends that do kind of parallel things to games, who end up doing sort of architectural visualization and then make the jump to games later on. And I think it's just super important to consider that, right?
Also, I think part of the issue is when I was younger, I was incredibly arrogant because I spent a lot of my time when I was working at all these studios, I was throwing my requests and applying at every studio in the UK. I wouldn't even get an email back, and I was so frustrated. I was kind of blaming them. I was like, I'm as good as anyone else, and I could do the job. And I mean, I look back at my old work, and I'm like, holy shit! This is stuff which isn't even textured, just models, and it's like this isn't even remotely good enough. And I don't know whether that came from I was playing professional sport, so obviously if you're doing that, you're the best of the best in that particular domain. And I don't know whether that attitude leaked into my art and I got completely deluded. But yeah, early on, I was a very disgruntled, arrogant, frustrated. And yeah, it pushed. I think I had a couple of conversations with. Actually, I think it was meeting the Dynasty community. It was when I met Jeremy and I met a few other artists, and I started poking their brains a little bit, and I had some very honest and frank conversations where I was like, "You're not even close. Like you've got a long way to go." And that's when I sort of made the decision. I was like, okay, I need to really commit. If I'm going to do this, if I do want to work in AAA games, I need to commit to it. So it's okay, quit rugby. Invested all my spare time into developing as an artist, and like I made very rapid progress once I did that. But yeah, early years, especially being like self-taught as well. Like you don't know who the people are. You don't know you haven't when you're in university. I think you during that time through like tribal knowledge or speaking to your peers, you kind of figure out what's what, and you get a bit more of an insight into things. I was very much in a little bubble on my own. I didn't really speak to anybody creatively in the industry up until like by probably the age of 24. Because all the artists I was around at my early studios, they weren't really interested in getting into games. They were just kind of like earning their living as an artist, which is perfectly fine. None of them were like looking at like who they didn't have art stations. They didn't pay attention to games they were shipping. They were just kind of like they made their thing. They finished. They went home. And that was it. So yeah, me now to me then it's like it's very different. I guess that's part of like I get it, it's part of growing up, but it's amusing. I look back and I do chuckle and think, Jesus Christ, I was so stubborn and the only word I can use is arrogant. It sounds really bad, but I was incredibly arrogant. Still am a little bit, I guess. If you speak to any of my friends, I can be quite stubborn.
Do you know what? there's a lot about that story that I really do relate to. I'm sure many, if anyone who went to university with me watches the show. I like to think that I've definitely grown and matured since that time. And I think you know a lot of advice that people give always applies to the traditional route, the very vanilla route. And
Mm-hmm.
a lot of people in games don't take a traditional route. A lot of people at a senior level did not take a traditional route in games, and it's super cool and super interesting. But I had a question that sort of came off from one of the things you said, and I really wanted to know: is there anything about your time playing rugby that has transferred to your role as an environment artist now?
Um, Probably a couple of things. Like, I mean, I am an extremely competitive person.
Hmm.
Um,
Naturally.
but yeah, well, I mean, you sort of have to be in that environment. But it's very every time I speak to studios in the interviews, this comes up. And one thing I would say is, although I'm hyper competitive, it's very much from a team's perspective. Like within my studio, I want my studio to make the best games, and I'm very passionate about that. And there the industry is very different. Like in the rugby industry, like rugby industry in rugby, it was kind of if it's very blunt.
Hmm.
You're hung out to dry. If you screw up, if I miss a tackle, there's a video with 30 guys looking at it and they would just pause it of me missing a tackle. Yeah, so Alex, why'd you miss that tackle? And it's like there's nowhere to hide. It's very honest, and no one's out there to humiliate you. No one wants to upset you. It's just they're all trying to. We want to win and we want to be better. And that mindset has leaked into how I conduct myself in the industry today. Dial back a lot because that was one of the things actually I learned at Decagon as a lead, that not everyone is like me. Not everyone likes very blunt and harsh feedback. There's different types of people, and that's something I'm still trying to learn today. And then the other aspect is the work ethic. Like it's in rugby, no one really cares about anything, about your life, about what you're going through. It's are you good enough to do the job, yes or no? It's meritocracy kind of is the name of the game there, and that mindset. So it's like I'm not. I mean, anyone who knows me, from the rugby days, I'm not a physically gifted person. I have to work extremely hard to stay in shape. my early rugby career, I was terrible. I can't. I mean, even into my later career, I still could have passed the ball very well. I was very much a physical player, so I had to work super hard to like get to where I was, and that mindset did shift into the games, which is probably why I managed to make good progress. When I did quit rugby, it was right. Okay, like it's like just like in rugby, I've got to get better at a specific thing. Rather than going to the gym, it's I've got to put in the time in my craft, and that work ethic leaked in that I still carry today. Like if I need to get better at something, is there something I need to improve on or learn? It's very easy for me to sort of switch mindset and just kind of go into work mode. It comes very naturally to me. So probably the two things from my rugby days which have sort of leaked into my career.
There's so much cool and exciting stuff to dig into there. So I just was going to first mention sort of the different kinds of people that you encounter in games, and this is something that I've had to learn, and we all have to learn. Like, I'm easy to talk to. I run a podcast, and I naturally fill the silence in meetings, and I like to sort of draw people out into the conversation and stuff like that. However, you can push people too hard, right? And you can make people feel uncomfortable. You can take that too far, right? Um, and that's a very tricky lesson to learn. It's not super obvious. It's not, and it takes practice to get used to that sort of thing. But in terms of the hard work that you put into that came naturally from your rugby side of things, do you ever find yourself pushing yourself too hard, or do you think there's a line with you with like how hard you work, or are you just sort of naturally built that way and you can sort of put a lot of hours into the craft? I always find that a really interesting thing to sort of dig into, right?
Yeah, so I gave a talk at Vertex conference earlier this year, titled "Mental Bandwidth and How to Manage It," and I mean, it was part of whenever we talk about mental health and all that kind of stuff. I dislike it. It gets made very black and white, and it just isn't. Like, you're dealing with individuals and people. I so I, where this all came from, the mental bandwidth talk. There's a reason I made it. It was I'm an incredibly industrious person. I do a lot. I mean, last year I was working 2 full-time jobs. I was running 2 podcasts. I was doing mentorships. I was making personal art. I was doing a lot of stuff, and too much. There is a line, 100%. But someone messaged me, and they were kind of guilt tripping themselves. They were looking at myself, and there's a few other people in my circles who are incredibly hardworking individuals, and it was kind of like, I've really struggled, and I kind of feel really crappy that I see you guys doing great things, and I'm not. And there is a flip side, like there's always a good and a bad, and like a lot of people early on in your career. And I imagine if you're a junior listening to this, you're gonna have one perspective on it. If you're anyone who has experience and like a senior, they're gonna have a completely different perspective. Early on, that mindset of being able to work really, really, really hard and it not burn me out or not affect me was great. I made great progress really, really quickly. The flip side of that is I really struggle with relaxing. If I'm relaxing, I'm normally quite agitated, and that is a side of my life which did reach breaking point at one point, and I had to do a lot of figuring out and balancing out. So to the juniors out there, it's like, oh, I wish I could work as hard as that, and that's it would come naturally. But imagine there's a lot of seniors out there who are like, I wish I could switch off and just relax and go home and not think about work, because it's not all sunshines and rainbows. Like, you speak to any of the great artists out there, they nearly all had to do it. They all kind of reached breaking point one way or another. It's why I actually haven't really figured out how to tackle this, in the sense of, I find it weird when I see really experienced artists telling younger artists like, hey, don't work with don't put in crazy hours and don't do this because I did it and it was really tough. And I'm kind of like, you're right, but you wouldn't necessarily be who you are today without it. So it's kind of hard to say, don't overwork yourself and all that kind of stuff, because it feels almost hypocritical. Like, I don't feel comfortable saying that. What I do say is, how about like understand what you want out of this industry. If you want to work on the biggest games and be the best artist you could possibly be, and all of these kinds of things, yeah, you're gonna have to put some hours in. It's not gonna You're not gonna be able to just do your 9 to 5 and then progress through. Like, you are gonna have to put some time in. That being said, and this is where like I don't like the fact that this part of conversation doesn't get said enough. If you are the type of person who doesn't really care, they just want to they want to work in games, they want to do their 9 to 5, and they want to go home and play games all night. I Nothing but respect. Great, I'm really happy for you because you found what you're trying to get out of life and what you're trying to get out of this industry. And that's where the question always comes down to. Like, you need to figure out what you want, and then you can make decisions based on that. Like I said, if you're not happy where you are right now, as an artist, like I wasn't, 24, I was looking at my art. It wasn't great. I wasn't very happy. And I had to make some choices. I had to quit the thing that I spent from the ages of 13 being completely committed to, which was rugby. Had to dial back the amount I was playing games to really invest in my craft and my art. And that was a sacrifice. And there's a price to be paid for that. Now, I said I reached breaking point. I went too far, like I said, doing the 2 jobs and the 2 podcasts and the mentorships and all that sort of stuff. Eventually, I did get burnt out and spent a few months having to I took a pause on the podcast. I quit one of the jobs to focus on just one. And it's kind of, I don't think that's necessarily bad. I don't know if I look at that and go, oh, that was really bad, I shouldn't have done that. I kind of look at it as, okay, there was my limit. I know where my limit is now, and I can sort of work off of that. And now I'm like, I'm really happy with the studios I'm at. I'm really happy with the art where I'm at. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to focus on other things right now. Home life, photography, just seeing my friends more. Like, that's where my priorities are right now. And that's because I know where I'm at as an artist and what I'm trying to get out of this. Like, I think that's the core of it. If you could really understand what you want out of this industry and out of your job right now, you can make more informed decisions. I think a lot of people just look at what other artists are doing, like myself, and go, "Oh, he's doing all of that. I need to do that." And it's like, well, we're 2 different people who have 2 different sets of stress tolerances, 2 different mindsets, two different sets of priorities and goals. So you can't just look at these. And I made that mistake, right? Like, there's artists I looked up to, and I'm like, oh, they have a portfolio with like 200 amazing pieces and like X amount of followers. Like, oh, I need to be that. And it's a stupid mindset. Like, it could screw you up, and it did screw me up quite a bit. So more perspective you can get, and the more you can understand yourself and what you want, I think you can lead a far healthier career.
Absolutely. It is very much a very personal thing. And I think what a lot of people misunderstand about working hard and crunch and things like this is it really isn't as simple as you either work hard and crunch, or it doesn't even necessarily have to be about crunch. You can work a very regular work schedule and then go home and keep going on those personal projects, on podcast projects, or on a little side game that you're working on.
Mm-hmm.
And really, it is never as black and white or as transparent as you're either working super hard, or you're just like clocking off all the time. And it's one of those conversations that, like you were saying, you need to weigh it up for yourself, and where you're at in your life. Maybe you're at a point in your life where you just want to spend time with your friends in the evenings, or maybe you're at a point in your life where you really want to start making that small dream game by yourself. And I had a year where I started the year and I was doing game. I think I've talked about this on the show before, but I was doing game a month. Putting out a project every single month. I was doing the podcast as well, and right then in that moment, that's exactly what I wanted to do with that time. But as the year sort of, I was halfway through the year, and I was like, I can't do this for the whole year.
Mm-hmm.
I think I ended up finishing 4 of the games and maintaining the podcast prep and all that stuff. It was the time when I was sort of prepping up to get the podcast off the ground. And again, if someone had said to me, you shouldn't do that at all, it just wouldn't make sense, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's very much about like finding what works for you. And you mentioned like you sort of hit that burnout breakpoint, right? And you sort of scaled back from there. And I don't necessarily think, people have to get to a break point, and I don't think people should, you know, there's nothing wrong with ever getting to that point. Some people work too hard and overdo it, right?
Mhm.
Um, and both of those things are challenges, right? Yeah, it's a tricky conversation. I feel like we've mixed up the order of the podcast today, but I'm always happy to sort of go where the conversation flows, right?
Yeah, and look, the thing is, if you, like I said, if you do find a way, it's like I don't want to, I want to just, I'm already in a studio and I don't want to, work on personal projects. I'm like, cool, like I said, respect. You want to take the rest time, like I completely understand. It's like, but then the counterpoint is always you kind of forfeit your right to complain that you're not where you want to be. I know some of the early mentorships, this conversation come up a few times where it's like, well, how much time are you spending doing X, Y, Z, and how much time are you spent on your developing as an artist? And it's like, oh, I'm spending a couple of hours a week. And I'm like, all right, maybe you should ramp up more. But I want to spend more time doing this. I'm like, cool. Like you got to pick what you want right now. Like, and it's, I think is like I said, it's understanding what you're trying to do and what you want. It can sound a bit harsh when you say like if you wanted to spend all your time relaxing and that's it. Like again, respect, good, but you don't get to just sit and complain. And this happens a lot online, right? Like you see people say, "Oh, it's I shouldn't have to. I shouldn't do this. I shouldn't have to." It's like, okay, cool. Like you shouldn't have to, but like you're in one of the most competitive fields on the planet, and that if you don't want to, fine. But there's hundreds of other people who will do it and do want it that bad, and it's you got to choose your poison, pick your poison. That's what I said, choose or pick. No, you got to pick your poison. What do you want to do? Which one do you want to do? Do you want to relax and have all that free time to yourself and play games and see your friends all the time? Like it's a balancing act. And the best way, actually, someone, and I didn't get this juggling act right, but there's a metaphor which I saw and I really, really like. Well, two stages of the metaphor. The first stage is a guy described life as you're juggling three balls: work, family, and your physical health. And he said that your family is a glass ball, your work is a plastic ball, and your physical health, I can't remember what I think it was metal. And the point he made was you could drop one of the balls, but you got to be very careful which one you choose to drop, which was, if you drop the family ball and it shatters, you don't get to pick that back up. Whereas work, you can always pick back up. And then a lady, and I do forget her name, but she took that metaphor a step further. She said, instead of thinking of it as three balls you're juggling 50. And each component of your life is a different ball. Now, not all family balls are glass. Funny sock day at school is a plastic ball. Going to your kid's birthday party, probably a glass ball. And with work, your deadline at work is probably a glass ball. Developing your personal art on the side, probably a plastic ball. And you got to pick and choose when you choose to drop it. And I like that because it's not like we have to work, we have to earn money, we have to pay our bills. And I really like that metaphor because it does kind of contextualize things where like, yeah, I do need to develop my art, but it's okay for me to take them days off and, spend time away from it. Just like it's good that you spend time with your friends or your family. Family is probably an extreme, like with your friends. But sometimes maybe, you know what, I can't hang out on Discord tonight and play games. I need to work on myself a little bit. It's okay to drop them. And I think thinking of your life in that manner of working, and that's what I mean by understanding yourself. Work out what are the glass balls and what are the plastic balls, and they change. Like sometimes a glass ball becomes a plastic ball, or sometimes a plastic ball becomes a glass ball. Really understanding where you are in your life, in your career, and all that kind of stuff is really important because, and it's that developing your own personal life can become a glass ball if you're in a position I was, where it's like it's affecting your home life. You're becoming, really not depressed, but like really frustrated and really down on yourself. Suddenly, that plastic ball of developing yourself as an artist so that I can get a job that I actually want. Suddenly, that's becoming more and more like a glass ball, and I need to focus on that more. So it's a really interesting metaphor I like, and I think it does sum up kind of the point, right? Like, understand yourself, know where the sacrifices are, know what are okay sacrifices and what aren't. And you're not going to get it right, but I think it's a very good way to sort of conceptualize all of this.
I love it. It's a super elegant metaphor, and it really makes me think about the sort of personal journeys that we all sort of find ourselves on as artists and creatives, right? Uh,
Mm.
I try to think about sort of as you were sort of talking about that. I was sort of thinking, is the podcast, is it a metal ball? Is it a glass ball? It's definitely changed as well, like you said with that
Mm-hmm.
metaphor. Um, and sometimes it's about prioritizing it when you can, and sort of letting it drop when that's an option, and then catching it when
Yep.
you really can't afford to drop it. Right? What a fantastic metaphor. Sort of tying into that a little bit, I would love to hear you talk a little bit about the podcast that you run, and sort of why did you start the show? What are some of the challenges that you faced while running it, and just generally, how do you find hosting a show?
So I always feel bad whenever I get asked this. I started a podcast for a lot of selfish reasons. Like I said, I was self-taught. I didn't know the industries are very, when you're on the outside, like, it's weird. Now I'm in the industry and I know a lot of people, and I know who's at what studios, and I know who are like owning what pipelines, and who's the right person to talk to get this information. When you're on the outside, you don't know anything. Like, it's very hard to get that information. Like, I know where to look now, so I know who to ask. If I don't know something, I know who are the right people to ask to find out who I should be talking to. When you're on the outside, you don't have a clue. And I kind of just went, oh, okay, what is that? At the time, Polycount was big, and it's our station. That can't really be it. All right, I'm just going to speak to people. And I just started messaging artists I looked up to. My first guest was Ben Wilson, who I was at the time learning material art. He's one of the biggest material artists. I'm going to go talk to him. And it became that. It was who am I interested in? And like, I've very not selective with the podcast, but I'm like, I need to be wanting to talk to you. Like I said, this is a selfish endeavor. I've had people reach out in the past to like, hey, I'd love to come on, and I'm like, cool. Yeah, what would you be interested in talking about? I don't know, whatever you want. I'm like, okay, I don't really know you, and you can be a fantastic artist. It has nothing to do with your artistic ability. It's just there's people who are doing interesting things, or they'll do a piece of art which catches my eye, and I'm like, I just want to talk about that. So it's a very much a selfish endeavor, and like come back to that metaphor, it did change. Early on, it was a glass ball for the first 2.5 years. It was every week, it was an episode, and I had to do an episode, and I, with hell on earth to make sure I got an episode out a week. And we reached that point where, reached breaking point where you're doing 2 podcasts, 2 jobs, all this sort of stuff. And I was like, okay, I dropped that glass ball. It broke. I was burnt out a little bit. Took some time off, reconsidered some stuff, and I'm like, okay, bi-weekly. Is that still okay? Is that still feasible? Yeah, push 100%. And it changed, and it became a plastic ball. And I missed it. The thing that you find is once you miss, it's a very slippery slope, because once you miss one, it's very easy to then go, okay, like, I may as well miss another, and I may as well miss another. And I think that's kind of how it came about with the burnout. I think it was, I let one slip, and then suddenly I had no energy to pick it back up. So I was just like, okay, a bunch slipped. But now I've let it become a bi-weekly thing. It's that I have a far healthier relationship with the podcast. It doesn't feel like a chore anymore. And hosting, it's funny. I mean, I've had people message me in the past as well who are like, oh, you talk too much, like, on a podcast. I'm like, okay, yeah, cool. Like, I mean, I get it. I can see why you'd say that. I mean, but again, I do this for selfish reasons, because I want to have a conversation with somebody. Mm-hmm. So thank you, like, for getting in touch, but I'm going to keep doing it the way I want to do it. So yeah, that's kind of my relationship with the podcast. And like, I just had Ash Thorpe on, who's he runs a collective podcast, a podcast which I looked up to. Like, as an artist, he's an amazing guy. He's incredibly talented, runs an amazing podcast. And I'm kind of like, I remember there's an experience I had, and I told this on to him off air, that I had to stop listening to game podcasts because they were influencing how I was doing my thing. So he had Clinton
Mm.
Crumpler on. I was having Clinton on in a couple of weeks, and I listened to his podcast, and it completely dictated how I ran my one, because I was dodging certain things because I knew he'd spoken about it, so I didn't want to retread it. Even though I wanted to talk about it, I wanted to discuss it with him. I was like, oh, I've got to dodge that because he's already spoken about that. So ever since then, I've sort of dodged game art podcast because I'm like, I just want this to be what I want to talk about with no outside influences. And whatever it is. If this is a conversation that's, they've had somewhere else, cool, okay, but this is for me. And if people if people enjoy it, great. If they don't, they don't. But it seems like people like it, so I'm doing something right, I guess. Yeah, that's kind of the podcast in a nutshell. It isn't. I don't have any grandiose plans with it. I've been offered multiple times to like monetize it through various means, and I'm like, I'm not. As soon as you attach money to it, now it's an obligation, and now it's a job, and I don't want it to become a job. Like there's this. I hate this phrase. I know you probably heard it before. The whole if you do what you love, you'll never work a day in your life, which is
Oh.
complete and utter nonsense. If you say that, you're not thinking straight. So it's kind of like, but as soon as I felt like if I start like monetizing a podcast, I was like, it's gonna make it a job, and I don't want this to become a job. I want to enjoy it. I want this to be, no strings attached. I want to keep it that way. So yeah, that's one weird thing I did. I mean, I spoke to my friends about this, and like, why did you do that? That's crazy. You could have done this. You could have done that. And I'm like, it's a weird relationship I have with the podcast. I don't want it. I don't need this to become a business. Like, I have a job, and I'm very happy in that job. I don't need another one.
Oh, absolutely. There's so much. There's so much there that I really relate to, and I'd love to start by just mentioning it is exceptionally difficult to get the balance right with your guests. Between listening to what they have to say and guiding the conversation. It is an unbelievably big challenge, and of course, it's all depending on how much you edit. And on this show, it's all pretty much what you see is what you get.
Yep.
So guiding that conversation into, it's a real challenge. It's definitely something that we all work hard as podcast hosts. And I have a few mates that do podcasts, and it's way, way, way easier than just talking too much or talking too little. It's a fantastically complicated thing. And doing the podcast, we're a monthly podcast here, and even that could be a challenge sometimes, right? It always ends up seeming to be the last 2 weeks is go time
Yeah.
on the podcast, right? And that was the thing. I did consider doing it bi-weekly, and I thought about it, and I thought, if I go bi-weekly, it's gonna be quite relentless for me and my schedule, right? And I didn't want to start going bi-weekly and then have to say, right, let's go monthly. I thought, let's go monthly and see how that goes, and then we can step it up if needed. And we might have some big plans in the work for year 2 of the Game Dev Garden, but right now we're enjoying the monthly schedule, right? But so call me a little bit inspired by where that conversation went, but in terms of sort of like getting to talk about stuff that I'm really excited about, could we talk a little bit about Godfall and what that project was like as an environment artist? Because that is an aesthetic game, and it has this like a very unique flavor, and it's so difficult to find a unique aesthetic these days. And I would just love to be honest with you, I'd just love to chat about that holistically.
So Godfall was an interesting development. The aesthetic, it was something that it took a lot of getting used to, and you need to kind of like, it was hard to really understand the aesthetic until you played the game and we played builds, and you go, okay, like this is the kind of gameplay it is in this characters, because a lot of the aesthetic is born out of the characters. Them armor sets, the valor plates, they kind of, they set the goalposts of how far you can go and how wild you can go with the aesthetics. But with these types of games, with these hack and slashers, you are set with a challenge. You have to create arenas, and then you have to create connecting paths to the arenas. So it was a very much you were given a lot of actually. That's one thing I think I really enjoyed about that production. You were given a lot of creative freedom. Gameplay came first. It was, as long as we can do these mechanics in these spaces, you've kind of got a license to go crazy. And we had I had a really good team to work with. I had Tim Simpson as my environment art director, and I had Evan McKnight as my lead artist. I sat on both teams of the asset team and the world building team, and there was a lot of autonomy given to you. Like, I mean, there was a time when we're doing the DLC, and I'm like, oh, okay, I think our aesthetic, our architecture could change. I think we should go more brutalism. And it was like, okay, like, go explore it. And me and Evan went away and we worked on some kits and figured out what could or couldn't work, and came back, pitched it. It's like, oh yeah, we like it. Okay, let's incorporate this through the wider environment. So that ownership to be able to make creative decisions was really fun. Obviously, like with anything, when you're making games, you're making a game. So there were times where it's like, okay, this space is really big, and it's, as an environment artist who likes logic and world building and all these sorts of stuff, it's like, how do we justify there being a fourth room in a row, which is a room? And it's hard. Like, as an artist, it kind of scratches at you a little bit, but it's like, it's learning to kind of create them bits of world building and then them aesthetic little bits in the right places. In a sense, don't put a gigantic interest in like piece of like geometry and like props in the center of the arena, so now navigation's screwed up and it's hard to like have combat in there. That was something you had to get used to a little bit. But yeah, we had license to do a lot of things. Like, we were given some really good kits to work with for our outsourced partners, and we as a team were able to go ham. And the really nice thing is we had really strong thematics through each round, because each round was linked to an element. So you had the earth realm, you had the water realm, the air realm, and the fire realm, which was the DLC. And it's kind of, you just lean into them. Like, they give you everything you need with the architecture kits that we had back from outsource. You kind of just had to throw stuff together and create interesting shapes and spaces using them. And that was fun. That was like really, that is the most creative autonomy I've had at any studio, any job. Like, and I didn't expect it to be on a launch PS5 title. That was shocking. Not shocking. It was surprising to, working with all these fans. Also, though, this is a really weird thing. I'm working with people who I've looked up to for my whole career. That was the first time I was with people who I actually like, either studied their art or I looked up to them as artists. Tim Simpson, I was a huge fan of. Kurt Kupsat, who I actually then followed to the initiative, is one of the smartest guys I met with shaders. And it's not also very rare you come across people like that who are like artists and technically minded. Enrico and Anna are amazing material artists. It's like, it was a very weird experience to be amongst all this talent and then given all this creative liberty, because I expected to, I don't know, be, when I'm surrounded by these people, to be far more not micromanaged, but like, do it this way, do it that way, do it this way. And it wasn't any of that. It was a lot of conversations, a lot of back and forths with the team. I had conversations with Tim almost daily at one point where we're just kind of like, hey, I have this idea for this space. What do you think? And it'd be like, oh, it's a cool idea. Maybe just push it this way a little bit. Apart from that, I like it. And it's like, that was great. That was, I've really got to stretch my legs from the sort of world building level art side of things, because, I could kind of, like I said, as long as the design were happy, and the game played the way we wanted it to, and obviously it wasn't, using the wrong assets in the wrong arenas, I was given a long leash, and you don't get that in many places. So that's what I was really grateful for on Godfall.
Absolutely. I just love that autonomy in dev sometimes, when, you're just given a problem and you just get told, come to us with a solution, work out where you want to take this. I've had some of my best dev experiences where I've basically just been thrown a little bit of brief from a director, and I'm left with, an environment artist and, a prop artist, and you have an LD as well, and you guys come up with the solution. You pull it from your creativity, and you just come at it from that collaborative mindset. And I definitely think cross studio collaboration can be quite a challenge. And you mentioned, you mentioned that you work with some outsourcing teams, and us at Ubisoft are no stranger to uh, studio co-dev and stuff like that. But I was going to ask you, so do you have any tips or advice for that sort of both that studio collaboration, but also that sort of cross-discipline stuff as well, because
Mhm.
that is not easy to get right.
I think the most important thing I can speak to for that is you need to communicate your intentions. Um, like I said, coming back to the whole team thing, it's like we're all on the same team. We're all out to make a game. And it's very easy, especially with environment artists and level design, because you work so closely together, for it to become an us versus them mindset. It's very easy to get into that space, and you have to really fight against it. Like I always speak about this with some of my colleagues. Like it's easy. Negativity is easy. It's easy to be negative. It's easy to be pessimistic. What's really hard is to be positive and try and be a positive change. And I've been on both sides of that coin, but when you're working with your designers as an artist, it's communicate your intentions. Like understand what they're trying to achieve and what they want to do with their job, and make sure they understand what you want. Um, because sometimes it's like you can unintentionally make someone's life difficult because you didn't communicate something. An example of this would be, and I did this. Um, we There's a particular space which needed arting up, and I completely redid the whole arena floor. So there was basically, it wasn't one big circle. There was like lava rivers and stuff, and it looked great. Like, and I showed my art director, and he's like, "That looks sick. That's good." Showed us, I finished it. Showed us. So I spent about 3-4 days on it. Showed design, like, yeah, that's completely screwed up. Like combat, you need to revert that. And at the time, I was pissed. I was like, oh, God, designers was making life difficult. And it's like, if I'd have just spoke to my designer first, I knew what I was doing. I knew I was changing the footprint of the level. So if I'd have just spoke to him, they could have been like, oh, don't do that because of these reasons. And then we could talk and have a compromise. And then it's like, okay, well, if I can't do that, what can I do? Oh, this space over here isn't so essential. You could maybe play with that. I'm like, cool, okay, we could do that. And the same goes for design. Like end of the day, we are trying to make we want to make good art, and we want to make interesting looking spaces. And if you leave it as raw design space, it can look incredibly gamey. There's a reason Last of Us levels look so fantastic. It's because their artists and designers are in sync. They are on the same wavelength. And they're able to create some really amazing levels. And I think that's what you're aiming for, is to be on the same wavelength. So yeah, if you collaborate, and this also goes for the disciplines too, right? Like you, especially as an environment artist, like you are touching everything. You're going to be working with characters. You're going to be working with VFX. You're going to be working with lighting, with the graphics renders and the programmers, the AI people. It's like you're going to be working with all these different disciplines. Get used to communicating your intentions, like, because people point out, like, again, we're on the same team. No one's gonna intentionally like make your ideas bad or like stamp out your ideas for the sake of it. We all want to make a great game. So if you say something and they say something is an issue, it's an issue, right? Like, and if it's a case of, well, it's like the unstoppable force and the immovable object, and you kind of like, okay, well, neither of us are willing to compromise. Great, that's what we have leads for. Leads will work out between them what the compromise is and what the correct way of doing it is. But you can't even get to that stage if you're not talking and you're not on the same wavelength. So yeah, I think just talk to your team more, and be aware of yourself as well. Like I said, I can be stubborn. I know I can be, and I know once I get an idea in my head, I want to do it. Noticing that in yourself, and goes the other way too. Like I'm this side of the fence. I've seen this on the other side of the fence with some of my peers, where they're not so talkative and they're not so pushy with their ideas, and they don't communicate, and they sort of always not back down, but like, you know what I mean. They're not as forward, and it's been where they've said something, like in confidence privately, not talk to their designers or not talk to somebody. Later on, it becomes an issue, and it's like, did anyone notice this? And it's like, I would look back in hindsight, go, you did notice, you just didn't want to say. It's like make sure you understand their intentions as much as you understand your own, because then you can both move forward. Kind of on the same wavelength. If all you know is their intentions and they don't have a clue what you're trying to do, don't be surprised when things break or things don't go right, because they're making, if you don't say anything, they're not psychic, right? Like they're just gonna do until you say otherwise. So yeah, it's funny actually, because communication is like such a stupid buzzword. Like back in the rugby days, if we lost, we'd all go, what went wrong? And if anyone said communication, we'd have to go do laps. The coach would just be like, no, it's not an acceptable excuse. Be specific. What went wrong? So when I say communication, it's communicate your intentions and make sure you understand their intentions. Then you can start to make some good progress.
Absolutely. The mentality of versus like I'm already doing that us and them, and it's so easy to slip into.
Yep.
But the LD and the LA, so the two sides of that fence, you know, the level designer always wants to make it play as well as possible, and the level artist often wants to see it look as beautiful as possible.
Mm-hmm.
And really, they actually need to align and come together and get that sort of, and they need to be aware of each other's intentions, and they need to meet right in the middle, because players want to see a beautiful space and they want to see it play just as well.
Mm-hmm.
And that concept of intentionality is so important. It's for designers, it's especially important, because you should have intentionality of what you want your players to be achieving. And if you can let your level artists know, we are going to be doing this for these reasons because I want to create this play environment, it can be night and day difference. And I've been guilty of this in the past. You'll chuck your block out over the fence, and all your gameplay works great. You're super chuffed with it, and your level artist is just like, what am I supposed to do with this like really obtuse, difficult placed thing that you've just stuck here? And it's like, well, I need it there for gameplay reason, and it's actually, in my opinion, it's a really good skill to have as a level designer, to sort of already be thinking, what can the environment artist do with what I'm placing? I can't just give it to them and expect them to work it all out. It's actually, I like to take some of that responsibility and put it on myself, because it helps that working relationship, and it helps create that that point in the middle where we can sort of come together to deliver the best space possible.
Yeah, and you've got it like when you're talking, and it's like, I have this great idea. Like, it's funny. I'm trying to like move away from the word compromise, and I think it's something I've heard. I think it might be Jordan Peterson talk about. It was both people should walk away from discussion happy. It shouldn't be I win or they win, or my idea won and their idea lost. Like, you should both walk out like, oh, that's amazing. So if you've like I said, you throw this thing over the fence to the level artist, and it's like, well, it's really screwy. Like, let's talk. And it shouldn't be, oh, your idea is bad and my idea, this is what I think we should do. You should both walk away like, oh, you've made my idea better, and you're able to now do your job. Like, oh, that's great. We're both really happy about this. It is more you can get to that where both people walk away really, really, really happy, like that, and energized. That's great, because then you have no losers. There's no losers in that conversation. Just two very happy, game devs, and it's that kind of, it's that balance, and it's a really hard balance to strike. I mean, we're game devs. We have egos. Like, we want to make the best thing for us. It's a very difficult thing to strike, and this is where, like, you look a lot to your seniors and your leads to help people get to that, ask that question. It's like, I don't, if I ever give feedback to people, or when I'm mentoring people, you don't give them the answers, right? Like, you ask the question and you help them find their own answers. So it's like when I'm working with some of my mentees, rather than just say you did that wrong, it's like, okay, how could you do this a different way? And you're getting them thinking, you're getting people in the habit of finding their own answers and getting used to accepting that their right solution wasn't the right solution without telling them it's wrong. because then you get people used to talking positively. If all you do and it's what I try to do a lot of my mentorships, it's like, don't say things are wrong where you can. Sometimes stuff's just bad and you need to, it needs to be acknowledged. But what could you do differently? I could have done it. I could have made this asset and this workflow. Okay, why would you have done that? Oh, I probably wouldn't have run into this error and this error. Okay, maybe you should explore that then. It's like, you haven't told them they're wrong. They're not a bad person. They're not a bad artist. They've discovered a different solution and they're going to try it. That mindset where you're not calling things out for being bad, you're just offering alternatives and helping them find their own answer, works both professionally and when you're working with newer artists or newer game devs. It works in both capacities. And it tends to, from my experience, not always, like I said, sometimes you do just come to the point where you're both not budging, but most of the time it breeds really healthy workflows. All my designers I've had nothing but positive interactions with, especially with Godful, where we were far more hands-on with each other. Really, I worked with 3 designers there. Really good relationship, constantly talking. Sometimes they'll tell me stuff I did wrong. Sometimes I'll offer a solution which is for design, which maybe make the space look a little bit more aesthetic. Great, happy. But it does take a little a give and a take. And it normally is, especially as an artist, and no artist is gonna like hearing this, but it's normally on the artist. Like, we are making games. Games are, if the game looks great, fantastic, you're going to get a bunch of players in, but they're not going to carry on playing it if it plays like ass. That's the fact of the matter. Like it or hate it, that is what it is. So I think, especially as artists, just being very used to just compromising, to giving a little bit, understanding we're making games, I think that helps a lot of people. And me, myself, I mean, I'm saying that, and some of my friends are probably going to be like, this guy's talking out his ass, because I want things to look great all the time, and I get frustrated by game dev for that exact reason. But we work in game dev, and it's like, okay, just remember that I'm working in games. I'm not working in film. I'm not making my own personal art. I'm making a game. And it's really hard to remember that sometimes.
It must be. And that's a super curious perspective. It's something that, as a designer and as specifically a level designer, we are the people who are always championing for, let's get this content to play as great as possible. And we can be guilty of sacrificing things, aesthetics on the altar of, this is going to be really fun, or sometimes realism as well. You chuck your realism out the window every once in a while because you want to do this really, really awesome thing. But I was wondering if, to round out the show, we could talk a little bit about mental health and your personal sort of mental health stuff in the games world. And would that be something you'd be all right talking about on the show?
Yeah, for sure. What particular aspect do you want to get into?
I usually like to talk about it just kind of holistically, sort of what stuff do you find challenging? What stuff do you think should be talked about a little bit more? Just generally, is there anything that you'd like to, shine a light on today?
I think one aspect which I'm in a very different place where, if you'd asked me this last year, I'm in a very different place. Right now, I am on a project which I'm going to be on for a long time. I'm very happy on it. I love my team. The team are amazing. I think more so now. So working remote is a very interesting thing. It's very easy to silo yourself off and just be isolated. I've worked remote even before COVID. I've been working remote now for 4 years, and my time with this team is probably contributed a lot to me being in a lot better place now. I gelled with them straight away. It's very hard to find a team that aligns across the board. Every single person on our team, I'm in the art team, we're on the same page, we're thinking the same thing, we have the same perspective on the game and what we're making and what we're doing. And that's great because it just means it's so much easier for me to speak to them about work when it's going good and when it's going bad. They are on the same wavelength as me. Some stuff I think my perspective on game dev, it's no secret, anyone I speak to, I say this, one day down the line, 5, 6, 7, 8 years away, I want to be an art director. And my whole mindset has shifted from I'm learning so much at work, being around amazing artists about the technical side of stuff and making games. And my mindset right now is in the day job, my 9 to 5, I want to focus on just making the best games. That's all I care about. Now, my own time, it's like, okay, well, I spent the past 4 years, 5 years, longer than that, really, even before while still playing rugby, being hell bent on working on great games, and that's all I cared about. In my own time, in my work time, that's all of my focus was. And it's like, well, now I'm at that point. I'm at that point where like I'm working on where I want to be. That's like, okay. So what now? And a big part of it now is, there's a couple of components. I'm focusing on my home life. Being a better friend, being a better husband, being a better dog dad. It's being better at that sort of stuff is one huge component, which I'm like, okay, this is where like I put my focus and attention to the gym when I'm a rugby, or put my focus and attention on personal art when I'm trying to get into the industry or trying to get further in the industry. I've now got to put work and effort and conscious time towards home life. That being said, as well, like there's other aspects of art I want to get better at. I don't get out, like, not playing rugby anymore means I don't get out as much. So I go into photography, and photography's been really great. Like, it's great being a student again. I think that's probably the biggest thing for it. It's like rugby, I was professional. Gamer, I'm now a professional. I enjoy being a student. I enjoy being dumb at something, and it's been so fun just being able to do photography and make a bunch of mistakes. And I was speaking to Jason Ord about this, and it's a really weird relationship I have with it. When I post game art, anything 3D, materials, environments, it's very nerve wracking. There's a lot of weight that comes with posting that because it's my career. It's everything. When I post photography, it's like I don't care. Like I just post it. It's up there. It's out. Whatever. I don't really pay attention. I literally post and I don't pay attention to it. And it's great being able to have that relationship with it because it doesn't have a weight or a pressure to it. It's weightless. It's effortless. It's enjoyable. So a lot of like sort of my just keeping myself leveled out nicely that's been my release, is just go do something completely separate to game art. And when I got my camera originally, I was like, I'm gonna do like photo scanning and all this sort of stuff, and I'm gonna like justify it to myself by having to contribute to my career. I'm really glad I've just gone the other way, and I'm like, I want nothing to do with the game industry with regards to my photography. When my friends talk tech and they're talking about scans, I'm like, cool, okay, I'm gonna peace out of this conversation. I have no interest in that. I want to keep it that way. I enjoy the relationship I have with it right now. That being said, it does have this long term, like there's this passive goal which is coming, where I'm like, I'm leveling up my artistic eye. Doing photography, I am learning a lot about how lights work, how a camera works, how lenses work, cinematography, photography, composition, color theory. There's a bunch of stuff I'm learning, which I'm like, okay, this doesn't directly tie. I mean, it does a little bit tie into game art, but long term of this grandiose goal of art director, this is taking passive steps towards that. And like I said, that's like 5, 6, 7 years where I need a lot more experience before I'm stepping into anything like that. But I feel like the photography still speaks to me as an artist to allow me to do that. And that's very good for my mental health. I see my friends more. I think and remote does this too, right? Like not being in the studio offers challenges. I'm having to be, like I said, my norm, my comfort zone is to roll out of bed at like 7 o'clock in the morning, sit at this PC until 1 in the morning. That's my comfort zone. That's my norm. That's what I'm very easily do. And that's not good. So like my wife helps a lot. I have to be very get out in the mornings. I work NA time. So I get out in the mornings. I'll go skateboard or I'll go do photography and going to see people, being very deliberate. Like, guys, I want to come up and meet this weekend. Do you want to do it? Like being very deliberate and almost sounds terrible. I have to block it into my calendar. Like I'm going to go do this. Just to make sure I'm getting out and seeing people, because if I don't, I'll fall into my habit, and my habit is to sit at this PC and work into 15 hours a day. And that's what I was talking about at the beginning. Some people really struggle to put themselves at their PC and work. I struggle to get away from it, and like I said, a lot of people probably hear that and go, "Oh, well, good, easy for you to say." But I'm like, trust me, over the course of a year, this can really damage you if you're not careful. So being very deliberate with that side of things has helped a lot. This year's been a lot better than last year, but I don't regret last year. Like, again, this is why I can't say don't do that, because it worked wonders for my career. It allowed me to do a lot of things. I can't say I regret, because I don't think I'd be where I am today without it. So it's, yeah, that's kind of where I am with the whole mental health thing. And like I said, anyone who's listening, like, go check out it's on my art station, the mental bandwidth talk, because I understand it talks all about the mental bandwidth stuff and like understanding yourself and the nuances to it. It makes things a lot easier, because when I speak to my friends about this, it's like, oh yeah, I didn't think of it that way. And I've seen my friends think about this in a more nuanced fashion, and it's great. It's great, because I'm seeing them be a lot healthier with their work habits. They're being, while still being productive as well. That's the thing. Like, this isn't about you just stop doing work and you just focus on just leisure time. It's like, no, it's about striking that balance so that you're efficient at both. Yeah, that's kind of where I'm at with my relationship with mental health. I know that's a lot, but that's kind of where I'm at.
Totally. Like, the discipline that it takes to both look out for yourself and look after yourself, while also pursuing the things that you want to achieve, in your personal life. I personally, interesting hearing that you want to sort of take the art director route and stuff like that. But um, a lot of people in the creative space who work their asses off often have like these really big ambitions, and they don't just materialize overnight. But it's about having that discipline to be able to pursue your goals, but also look after yourself and push forwards. And it was really nice hearing about your hobbies and sort of finding stuff a little bit outside of the game dev circle, but is kind of enriching some of your longer term goals and stuff like that. I have a couple of little side projects that do similar to that. But we will definitely you'll be able to find the mental bandwidth talk in the description below, and I think that is a really fantastic place to wrap today's show. Thank you ever so much for coming on, Alex. It's been really, really super rewarding. And like we talked about earlier, one of the reasons I run the show is to have, exciting conversations and listen to perspectives that are way outside of my little LD bubble. So it's been a real pleasure. Would you like to plug your Twitter and your podcast and all that stuff? And we'll chuck a load of links in the description and stuff below.
Sure. Like, if you go to if you search at Beddows Design into the Twitter, you'll find me on there. And I mean, all the links to all of my podcasts and mentorships and everything it's in the card link on there. And if you're interested in the photography side of stuff, again, at Beddows Design on Instagram, that's where I put all my photography. Yeah, you should be able to find all of that through the card link on LinkedIn and bios. If you're interested in my art station and all that sort of stuff, they'll all be in there.
Brilliant stuff. It'll all be in the description below. If a quick Google is a little too much for you, you'll find it below. So again, thank you ever so much for joining us here today at the Game Dev Garden, a podcast all about deep conversations, game development, curiosities, mental health, and wherever the dialogue might take us. Thank you so much, and we'll see you all next time.